Welcome to Frequency. I'm Chuck Gose.
And I'm Jenny Field.
Frequency is your go-to for real talk about comms, culture, and employee experience beyond the buzzwords and straight to what matters. Jenny, to kick things off today, I wanted to begin with a celebration that I saw you share on Instagram. I'm a little offended that I first saw this on Instagram. I thought we were better friends than that. But congratulations on passing 4,000 copies of your latest book.
Thank you. I know we got to 4001 just at the 6-month mark of Nobody Believes You selling. So I'm really pleased. I am really, really pleased. Sometimes it's hard to celebrate those achievements because you're just on to the next thing. But I'm really, really pleased. Really pleased.
I think that's an amazing accomplishment. As someone who has never written a real book, I recognize that achievement. But I wanted to kick off with a positive one to get you feeling really good about things so I could come back with a slightly negative one, Jenny.
Okay.
You know, we're going to talk a little bit about balance, I think, later on in this episode. But can we please talk about your abuse of time zones? Because we use WhatsApp, and we'll at some point we'll get into why we have to use WhatsApp to plan for the show. That's another thing. But the other morning I woke up and it was an absolute barrage of comments and questions from you. And I'm a relatively early riser. Like I'm up about 5:30 to 6 a.m. Eastern time, which I recognize is midday for you.
Yeah.
But now I'm sort of recognizing the pain of when I would work with West Coast colleagues and I would just barrage them with stuff, and they wake up at 8 a.m. and I'm hours and hours and hours into a day. But also then it happens the flip side where if you're ahead of the other person, I also recognize I'm probably sending you things at 8, 9, 10 o'clock at night, which doesn't seem late to me. But let's make this more about you, Jenny. Do you not recognize the danger of time zones?
No, because I work asynchronously. So when I'm messaging you on the basis that when you are awake, you will be able to deal with those. But I don't expect you to deal with them like as soon as you're awake or anything like that. It's more a case of here's all the stuff that we need for today, or here's the stuff I'm thinking about. When you get to it, you'll get to it. And then I do have to go, look, I actually need this now. So can you do
I
that?
felt like there was a
But
little more aggression this last time.
I need this now. It's because I've had a very busy week where I've been traveling a lot. So my time to do stuff has been really compounded. Whereas normally, if I'm at home, I've got time to think or I can pull stuff together, where it was like, I have got an hour to do this. And if I don't do it here, it's just not going to get done. So there was a little more aggression, but also know that when you send me stuff that's late that I pick up in the morning, I just figure you're sending it for me to read when I'm ready. So I figure the same.
Whatever. All right. Let's get into our discussion this week, Jenny. What do you have queued up for us?
So, in this episode, we are going to talk about a few different things. I think I've got about 4 articles for us to look at. We're going to talk about the impact of AI at work and a little bit of chat about work-life balance. So, I've got an HBR research piece that's looking at Gen AI and the impact that has on people's productivity and motivation. I've got something on this work-life balance and the importance of context when it comes to podcast sound bites. And I've also want to talk about the future of the role of line managers as well. But I want us to start with a piece from the Times over here that talked about our time in the sun coming to an end and a return to the office. Now, this was all about the return to office, which has been a topic for us here, I think, ever since we started this podcast. But there were some quotes from this article that I think are worth talking about because some of them are the things that I sent you on WhatsApp to annoy you the other day. So this is what the article says. There's a quote in it that says, tactics of potential bonus cuts or tracked attendance ensure compliance. Daniel Harris, director of the Recruiter, Robert Walters, said, increasing productivity is a key focus for many employers who aim to maximize workforce output through tighter monitoring. Now, I really struggled with this in terms of the tracked attendance ensures compliance statement, because I feel like we're kind of going back in time, talking about employees like they're a commodity or something. And I think this really dehumanizes work, and I know you don't like that phrase, but I feel like talking about it in this way and using this language is a bit dangerous. And I think that that's something we need to be mindful of. Now, the article does go on. It talks about the culture clash that's happening in organizations based on a survey that Michael Page have done with 50,000 professionals. Now, I can't find a copy of that survey, but in the Times article, it says that the survey found that 43% of managers believe productivity improves in person, but 46% of employees said they were more productive at home as a result of fewer distractions, better time management, and more autonomy. The article goes on to say that younger staff, however, are now the least keen on work from home. Workers under 24 are more likely to be in the office than older counterparts, according to property group JLL. The jobs platform Flexer, whose clients include Microsoft, TUI, and Virgin O2, report that Generation Z employees, that's those people born between 1997 and 2012, are least likely to apply for remote only roles. Now, this feels like there's just more and more data about the RTO debate every week. There's always something to talk about. But this latest insight does seem to suggest that there is a significant difference in generational preference in terms of going to the office. And maybe that goes against what people are thinking already, that young people don't want to come to the office, they want to be at home. But my first question, Chuck, is around what you think about this tracking and compliance piece, because I'm wondering if it's more common practice over on your side of the pond than it is over here, or whether you feel as outraged as I do about that.
Yeah, it is concerning to what you talked about. And there's a word in one of the quotes that I think is interesting because a lot of this we're talking about more knowledge workers in this case of requiring people
Yes.
to be at work. And they're focused now again on output. So how are you measuring outputs for someone in accounting? How are you measuring outputs for someone in HR? In comms, we've been trying to change the narrative of outputs to outcomes. What are you actually changing in the business? What are you improving in the business? Not how many things did you send, how many widgets did you build as part of it. So I think the tracking part all of a sudden becomes very big brotherish. It speaks to me that there's a lack of trust that's there. And I also just think some of the data is interesting when all the narratives you hear out there, and we've talked about the challenging word productive and productivity, when 43% of managers believe productivity improves in person, that means 57% don't believe it improves in person. And so you tend to think managers are probably an older generation,
Mhm.
millennial, Gen X or above. I think the interesting part for me is knowing that the younger employees want to come into the office. So you've got this balancing look at productivity versus desire. And I think that's encouraging that new employees do want to spend more time in the office. It doesn't mean they want to spend 5 days a week in the office. It'd be great if they have the choice to choose what's best for them.
Mhm.
But I think the monitoring and measurement and looking at outputs and how many widgets did you make is just feels like it's a massive lack of trust and then focus purely on control.
What do you think about that generational piece in terms of the younger and older people?
I wonder how much of that is related to COVID of the younger generations missing out on a lot of really important
Mhm.
social elements. Like I can't imagine what it was like going through high school or college during that time and missing out on some pivotal developmental social skills that you have.
Yeah.
So I think they're craving that. As humans, we do
Mm.
crave that.
Mhm.
So I think that's awesome that they want that. I just don't think everybody needs it 5 days a week, 40
Yeah.
hours a week.
It's really interesting data to me that there is this this desire from that younger generation to be more in person, because I do think there's a bit of a narrative that all the young people don't want that. And I think that's a good thing given that learning and that opportunity. So So yeah, I think it's interesting, but I'm glad we're aligned on the tracking and the control piece as not
And
being.
and just to reiterate, I want to make sure, like, return to office, RTO, if you like to use the acronym, that doesn't have to mean only in office. It doesn't have to mean 5 days a week. It could still mean that flex work, hybrid work, again, whatever language you want to use. So giving people that
Yeah.
choice, I think, is helpful.
Now, the next piece I want to look at was a piece from Harvard Business Review Research, which has done a piece on Gen AI makes people more productive and less motivated. So, AI has been a huge topic this year, and I'm always quite keen to see some research that backs up the opinion and the headlines because I think it's very easy to frighten people and all that stuff. But this piece from the Harvard Business Review says that there's this big opportunity by integrating generative AI into the workplace. And this is specifically around productivity, creativity, and innovation. But the research says there's also a downside. Now, this was a study of over 3,500 people where it found that using AI tools led to performance gains, but also made employees less motivated and more bored when they had to work on other tasks without the use of AI. So, if this is the case, then the argument, I suppose, is that leaders need to consider workflows and the broader employee experience that really drives that intrinsic motivation for employees and that need and that want to do things. Now, I was just having a conversation with someone actually before we jumped on to record this week's episode about some research I know they're looking at about AI and the impact on critical thinking and some of those things. And I can't talk too much about it because it's not out there yet, but I'm be fascinated to look at these more longer term studies that are looking at the impact of people today, and then they're using AI sort of low, medium, heavy usage, and then what happens after that in sort of 6 months. But I suppose my question on this is motivation and productivity go very much hand in hand, it feels, when it comes to employees. So if AI is the topic that everyone's talking about because they want to bring it in, but research is saying they're now less motivated, how do we get that balance right? And that's my sort of first question to you.
So when I read this, I took a slightly different point of view on it, where, we talked about the challenge of productivity, and this uses the word performance gains, which I don't know if
Hmm.
that's a synonym of being more productive. But then it said that they were less motivated and more bored when they had to work on other tasks without the use of AI, which to me says they were already less motivated and bored before using AI. So just let them use AI. Like if that improves performance and they're more creative or innovative and they feel like they're doing a good job, then let them use it, because without it, they're saying they're less motivated and more bored, which I'm guessing they probably were before
To begin with.
using AI. Maybe that's oversimplistic, but that was my initial reaction.
I love that. I love that. I read something else. I have to try and find it for the show notes for this because I was reading something else about using AI at different levels of the organization or different levels of expertise. And if you're a very high performer, using AI only makes your performance better by something like 7%. Whereas if you're sort of middle of the road or maybe not so good, not that sounds unkind, doesn't it? But if you're maybe in that, I'm going to go with middle of the road, then it increases your expertise or your perceived expertise by something like 20% or something. So
Hmm.
it's quite different depending on where you are, which made me think about a previous conversation we'd had about people would rather hire AI than people because they don't they can do sort of a similar job. But I love your take on it that it's like they were already bored. So give them some tools to play with that makes them curious and gets people
Well,
excited and
that's
maybe that
that's some of the
helps.
things that I've talked about, where AI gives you the opportunity to create and build in ways that you would have never had the
Yeah.
ability to do. When I think about how AI has shaped my use of one of the most exciting things you ever get to build, which are spreadsheets. And I don't think a lot of people think about how, like, if you're not an Excel guru, it's pretty tedious and pretty cumbersome to try to play around with formulas and do Google searches and figure out all of a sudden now, like, that is my formula assistant with
Mm.
AI. So I then feel like, wow, that I not only was I felt more productive, but what I'm doing is actually better work, and I'm not stuck in this grind of sorting through Excel where actually allows me to spend more time doing other things? Or is it creating images or creating video? I think there's all sorts of things that it does unlock some things other than just time, and gives people the freedom to create in ways that they haven't created before. So yeah, I do think people were probably pretty bored before, and this sort of lit a spark for them
Yeah.
having this counterbalance.
I love your take on it. I love it. I love that it's such a positive thing, but it's also making me think about the danger of just looking at numbers, right? And we talk about context all the time, and there's going to be so much more to that data than probably just those numbers that
Few
we've seen
people love
today.
digging into context more than me do.
Yeah, yeah,
Few
you do
people.
love it. You do
Yeah.
love it. So I'm going to bring us on to your favorite topic of work-life balance today. Now, there was an interview on Diary of a CEO with Emma Greed just a couple of weeks ago or a week ago. And there was a snippet from that interview that was shared everywhere about they're lying about work-life balance, was sort of the headline of the podcast. Now, Emma is the founding partner of brands Skims, Good American, and Safely, and they were all launched with the Kardashian family. She's also chairwoman of the 15% Pledge. She's a board member at Baby to Baby. She's been named one of Forbes' richest self-made women in America. And I had the pleasure of meeting her at a Unily conference in October 24, and she was fantastic to listen to. But she was interviewed on Diary of a CEO with Stephen Bartlett. And nearly every article I've looked at this week in preparation for this seems to come back to the conversation that she was having in here. Now, when you just get a snippet of a conversation, you don't have the context, and that's always important. And we've talked about that before. But what she says on the podcast is that you are responsible for your own work life balance. You're responsible for figuring that out. And she highlighted the fact that now work is so much more flexible in the office environments. And she's talking about her organization and what she's built. But she does also go on to talk about the fact that if you want to have maybe an extraordinary life, or you want to be at the top of your game, or you want to achieve great things, then it's going to be more than the 9 to 5. There's going to be more work and effort involved if you've got that ambition, you want to grow, you want to get to the top. You can't expect to do that in a kind of normal 9 to 5 environment. Now, interestingly, as that clip was doing the rounds everywhere, at the same time, I saw a post from Adam Grant, the professor, on Instagram, where he said burnout is rarely a personal problem to manage. It's usually an organizational problem to solve. If multiple people are drained, it's not in their heads, it's in your culture and structure. Widespread exhaustion is a sign that people are being overworked and undersupported. Now, for me, things like burnout and work life balance all kind of come together as one. Now, I know you're not a fan of work-life balance, but I do think there's something in what Emma's saying about the individual taking ownership of that. And I also know there'll be people listening to this saying, I want to take ownership of it, but the culture in my organization, to Adam Grant's point, just doesn't let me do that. It's just not possible. So I just wanted to get your take on it because this has been everywhere in the past sort of week or so. What were your thoughts on the interview?
Yeah, the you're right, it is not one of my favorite topics, but let's get into this a little bit. It's very
Mm.
convenient to say, "Hey, this is your problem to solve." Put that back on the person. That feels remarkably like corporate gaslighting in a way, like you're in charge. And I think when you now maybe this is the audience of the podcast and the people that listen to Diary of a CEO. There's a lot of people out there that yes, might want an extraordinary life, but that's a pretty far effort for them to get to there. I do like the point though around ambition that there's always going to be points in your life where there's going to be individuals who just push harder, try to fill up their cup more, and that's on them. But those aren't the people that I see challenged with burnout. Those aren't the people that I see challenged with work-life balance because they've already acknowledged there's not going to be a balance for them. That's not in the cards for them. We had a really great multiple conversations inside ecology about burnout. And I think the important part here to truly recognize, because I learned a lot in these conversations, is yes, work plays a part in that, but it's just a part in burnout. There's so many other factors on the personal side of an individual's life that can absolutely lead to burnout. Is it problems at home? Are you taking care of an aging parent? There's all sort of those things that can lead to burnout as well that have nothing to do with work. And all work does
Mhm.
is pile it on and say, "Hey, this is your this is now your problem to solve. Go figure it out." Boundaries sound great. That's one of the things we talked about in ecology. I recognize like I am horrible, horrible at setting boundaries, but that's on me to then set those boundaries. So yeah, I don't the ambition stuff, that's great. Those aren't the people that I see challenged with burnout. I see the challenge is saying, "Hey, this is your problem to solve. Companies, we're out."
It's interesting. So it's interesting what you said then about boundaries, and that's for you to set your boundaries. For me, work-life balance is another way of saying boundaries. Like, I decide like, what are my non-negotiables? What are the things that I do and don't do? And I've talked before about when I worked in an organization and I was starting work on the train at 6:15 a.m. and then I was in the office at 7:30 and then I left the office at 6 and I got home at 7:30 and I went to the gym and then I went to bed and then I just did it every day. Now I loved that. I did have a day at home, in that time as well, but I really enjoyed that. But it did get to the point where I said that this organization isn't in need, it isn't not in crisis. I don't need to be here this amount of time, even with the different time zones I was managing. So I'm going to leave the office at 4 in order to get back home at a reasonable time. And that for me is what we now call today that work-life balance. But what for me was putting in some boundaries around where I where I was comfortable. Um, and so I wonder if it's just that buzzword. I do think Emma is talking about her organization and the culture that she's created. And she starts it by sort of talking about if you're asking a question in the interview, like what's the work-life balance here? And she's like, I don't really want to hear that in an interview. Because I think when you're building a business and you're doing that, you want people that have got that ambition to kind of come with you. If somebody said, what's the culture like here? Which to me is the same question, but a slightly different way. I think that's a fair question to ask. And I wonder if we've just become uncomfortable with this balance piece, which we don't like anyway, because it's become to mean something that is a bit, I don't know what the word is, just a bit, it just doesn't really mean anything. Like it's just, that's all I've got.
I
And
see it as
maybe,
this as excuse me. I see it as the challenge of work and life being more of an elastic relationship. There's going to be times where work needs more, so life gives in. There's going to be times that life needs more and work gives in. And as long as people feel like they have that in their life, that's what works. Because when I think about balance, I always think about like gymnasts and the things that they're doing up on those beams and they're doing crazy flips and I'm thinking if you and I even probably just tried to walk across that beam, I would probably feel pretty good about myself making it all the way across, just simply walking toe to toe, getting down there. And then there's people that can go far and beyond and do all kinds of amazing things on there. So balance is again very, very personal. I think the organizations that get it right are the ones that recognize that elasticity between things, that there's going to be stretches, there's going to be pulls, there's going to be times you and I travel quite a bit and you need to pull in that direction, and there's times when you're like, "Hey, I'm home. I'm gonna pull back in this direction." We both work for ourselves, so we have those calls to make. Not everyone does. But I think that's what people now when it's work-life balance, I think that's actually what people want is that ability to give and take when one needs more than the other.
yeah, I love that. And there's a few people that are coming to my mind as we're having this conversation. The first is your friend John Acuff and his book All It Takes Is a Goal, where he talks about being in the season that you're in. And I say this to people all the time. Sometimes you're in a season that is tough and it's hard and that elastic is being stretched, and then other times you're in a season where you've got that space. And that links into the work of my coach, Chris Ducker, who's got a book coming out called Long Haul Leader, which he interviewed me for around how to be a leader in the world and not go through that sort of burnout, how to be in it for that long haul. And he always says, hustle is a season, it's not a lifestyle. And I think that sometimes we're made to feel like we've got to keep going and be doing everything all the time. Whereas actually, that's where that elastic just gets so stretched that you can't do it. Whereas if you find a way to come and go with that, and to your point, it's not just work, there's loads of different things compounding that. It's how we can find our way to navigate that. And that's why I think it's you know, that's something for you to look at. That's your boundaries for you to set. That's for you to say what's right for you and how much you can stretch that elastic at different times. I can't tell you that as your boss, as your organization. You have to know what's right for you. And I do think that is fair. I do get your whole like washing my hands of this as a company, but I think it is fair to say that you like what's right for me and what's right for you and what's right for my friends are all different things in terms
Mhm.
of what we're able to take on and manage at any one time.
Yeah, I
I think
blame
that's important.
the, like, Gary V's of the world for this hustle culture and this hustle
Yeah.
drive that people feel like everything they're doing has to be the best or at the top of the game, or if you're not profiting from like, people just can't have a hobby anymore. It's gotta
Yes, I
somehow
know.
make
Yeah.
money. Like,
Yeah.
I think there's that pressure that I don't know is being factored into work and life out there is this pressure to
Yeah.
be successful or influential or whatever that marker is.
This is the last one today, and this is on the back of a clip that you sent me, actually. It's Amazon CEO Andy Jassy talking about agility, AI strategy, and the changing role of managers. He's been interviewed talking about this, but he was also on the Harvard Business Review podcast, which is called IdeaCast. And he was talking about growth of the organization and how that impacts the ratio between managers and other employees and the impact that has. So this is what he had to say. So he said, as you get larger, and as Amazon have grown so much in the last 10 years, you end up logically with a lot of managers and then a lot of layers of managers. And so then you end up with things like a pre meeting for the pre meeting for the pre meeting for the decision meeting, so that owners don't feel like they own the decision. They're making recommendations because that decision is going up by sort of 3 levels. And I loved that he talked about this pre-meet, 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 because I talk about this in my first book, Influential Internal Communication, where I worked in an organization where everyone said, "Oh, we work at a really fast pace here." And it became very apparent there's just a lot of pre-meet, 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 pre-meet. And it's not so fast paced. But Andy went on to say that this is what they're going to try and limit. So they want owners doing the real work. They want to be able to move quickly and autonomously. And he says, and that's part of this effort we've taken, which is to increase the ratio of individual contributors to managers by at least 15% across the company. And they've beaten that already at the end of their first quarter. So they're trying to flatten the organization to move faster and to drive more ownership. Now, this is the thing that I think is really important is that ownership piece. And all the work I've looked at on sort of leadership and communication and organizational success, the further away we are from that ownership means we're further away from accountability. And that makes it hard to have credibility and be someone that people trust and want to follow. So I really wanted to get your view on this because you sent this to me originally.
Yep.
So I feel like you had a view, and I really want to talk about that.
This feels like a really clever way to dress up stripping a lot of people manager titles that they've probably spent a lot of time earning. And I've had the privilege of getting to work with the Amazon team in the past. And there's a lot of pride in time spent and seniority at Amazon. I believe it's even down to the color of your badge indicates how long you've been there. So there's a lot of people that I see that have probably worked really hard at that organization through a lot to earn a title of leading a team and being a manager. And now they're like, hey, we're having too many meetings. So we're going to take away your manager title. And what? Like that, the meetings thing and the managers thing, I don't see that that's necessarily a relation between the two, but he's connecting those dots. The meeting and meeting and meeting and meeting thing sounds like potential trust issues. It sounds like communication issues. It doesn't sound like you have too many managers issue. So Andy Jassy has been there a long time at Amazon. He has been afforded the luxury of probably working his way up through various manager titles. And then now it's like, hey guys, that cool. That worked for me. We're going to change it. And 15% of you are going to lose that title that we gave you, that you earned in one way or another, either coming from the outside or working your way up through the ranks. So I don't know. It feels again very convenient to make that statement. I just feel bad for those employees who worked really hard to earn that title and are now being told like, thanks, but no thanks.
I wonder how it's being done. Like, I wonder whether it's just a case of you no longer have that responsibility, or and whether those roles have gone, or whether those roles are still there, but they've changed that decision making and the ways of working. Because that isn't clear. Like, it's saying that they've changed that ratio, but it's not saying how they've done that necessarily. So
That's a good point too.
there could be any number of ways you could do it, because you, to your point, you can't just sort of take a blowtorch to a layer across the organization and not address the cultural issues that are going on
Don't
there
give them any
around
ideas.
trust.
Don't-
No one do that. Uh, but I just wonder how. And what I do think is important is we talk a lot about the kind of less is more. So there's always a lot of talk in communications, especially around adding more channels and doing more and doing more. And we don't spend a lot of time going, what can we sort of take away? And I know that that's not nice to talk about when it's people, but actually when an organization is looking at what is slowing us down, what are the things that are impacting that, let's try something and see what happens. It's too early to see what's going to happen, but if there isn't the measure that they're putting in for their success, whatever that is, they're going to have a good sort of 3 months in order to see. I always think 90 days is your good point to check. And I hope they review that and look at it. But I think taking something away and saying, let's stop having all of these different layers and let's work in a different way is better. I hope it hasn't meant, mass redundancies and layoffs across the organization. But I do think that removing some of that complexity of that decision making versus recommendation. And I've had this in my consultancy. So I'll have an inquiry in from someone, and we'll go backwards and forwards, and they come back and say, we really want to work with you. This is great. We just need to get the sign off. And then we go round in a few questions, and then it's like, oh no, they've decided to do something else. And that's hard, because you've sort of been told you've got this piece of work which is really exciting and you really want to help, but actually that they weren't the decision makers, and that's not fair on them, because they were obviously being made to feel that they were the decision makers when actually they weren't. And that's, I can get that. Like, what a waste of everybody's time to be doing that. And I think the less of that, the better. I think all round for me.
Yeah, I rarely see the structure of the organization being the problem. I've worked with some very flat organizations. That doesn't work. I work for some very hierarchical organizations, and sometimes that
No,
doesn't
doesn't
work.
work.
It's
Yeah,
not that, but that's an easy thing to point to. That's an easy thing
yeah,
that you can rebuild and fix to provide a solution. In my experience, I've actually found the Amazon meeting culture to be one of the more productive. I don't know what
yeah.
Andy Jassy would say about other organizations. He'd probably be terrified, because at Amazon, there are no decks in presentations, or no in meetings, no presentations
Yeah.
in meetings. You have to build a pre-read for people. So as the meeting owner, you have to give everybody the information before so they can digest it and come to the meeting prepared. So I actually see them as being very responsible
Mm,
with this. So maybe that's changed over the years. I don't know, but um, I that's why I was surprised that they went to the meetings thing, because my experience was they were actually very focused on making
yeah.
sure that the meetings had value. Andy Jassy, you're not listening to this. How many meetings are you in every day? Is this just something that leaders hear that the employees aren't experiencing? Like, did the employees, I mean, every employee would say they have too many meetings. Just
Yeah.
like every employee
Easily.
says,
Yeah.
we have too many emails, right? Anything more than one to some feels like too many. But is it real? Is it true?
Mm.
Or is this just, hey, we need to flatten some things. We need to eliminate some costs. We got to get some managers out. I don't know what all those things are. You know what? We're having too many meetings. I've heard that. So I don't know. I
I
just
feel
don't
like
like
you
the
could write
logic.
I feel like you could write some sort of comedy sketch on that one. Right. They are all our articles for this week. So now we're into what is freaking us out. What's freaking you out this week?
So it's probably a bit mild to freak out when we talk about context and semantics and just what an absolute fan I am of them. One of the things that I hate when people try to dress up boring stuff and just rather than just call it what it is. So when people are like, oh, we had a leadership campfire or fireside chat. But a fireside chat between leaders. I have yet to see one of these actually take place by a fire. They're never fireside anything. I actually want to see that. But no,
Mhm.
it's just a conversation. But we have to dress it up as if there's like between two ferns. And the Zach Galifianakis thing where it's like you've got ferns and a black stage and two chairs pointing at each other. Like that's at least poking fun at that, but a fireside chat. So my latest though is people, and I'm gonna be careful how I talk about this, Jenny, because I know you've done it. Hosting AMAs, and then but they're not. Like AMA stands for Ask Me Anything.
Mhm.
If you are going to host, and maybe this is because I'm just a jerk sometimes. If you're gonna host, and not you, Jenny, you the
Yeah, no,
listener.
carry on. Yeah, no, it's fine.
If you're gonna host an AMA, then everything should be on the table.
Yeah.
You shouldn't be able to say, well, I want to talk about these things, but not these things. Well, then that's not an AMA. Now you can say we're holding an AMA and just choose not to answer certain questions from people, but don't put the rules out. Don't limit
Yeah.
my creativity on these. Maybe I want to know what your favorite movie is. Maybe I want to know like what's the best concert you've ever been to. That gives context into people and you learn
Yeah.
about people. Don't limit it. So either do an AMA or don't do an AMA. Do a fireside chat or don't do a fireside chat. That's my freak out. What about you, Jenny?
That's fair. I am just gonna say that my AMA is Ask Me Anything. Like, I do say it's around these topics, but you can really come and ask me anything. So I'm actually, gonna link back something we've talked about. We talked a little bit in this episode about how everything's become a competition or something to sell and not enough play, and I am really excited that next week I have got my 3rd drum lesson, and I can only fit them in very sparingly because I have a diary that is now busy until early July. But being able to fit in time for something that is pure play for me, like I'm not learning to play the drums because I've got big ambitions of being on a stage, but it's always been something I want to do, and I'm just excited about the fact that I get to do my 3rd lesson with Ryan, who's my fabulous teacher, and have sort of an hour with him trying to hit some drums to a
I
tune.
love seeing it was sometime in the last month or two, you posted a video of you
Yeah.
doing that. And that's why I love seeing that. I love because it's not, you're not going to try to go be in a band yet. You're not trying to
No.
make money off it yet. I'm sure there's got to be an element of play and it's got to be somewhat therapeutic to just hit things sometimes.
Always.
And so if someone is interested, I'm going to do a little plug here off script around the value and importance of play, both personal and life. Check out Gary Ware, Ware. Gary Ware wrote a book all around the importance of play. I believe it's called The Playful Rebellion. I had the privilege of meeting Gary at a few events, spoke at one of my events, and really preaches the value and what businesses get out of letting employees play. Also taking that on the
Mhm.
personal side as well. So I love that you do that.
Yeah,
Um,
I love it.
One thing I did want to close with though, Jenny, and I forgot to mention this on our very first article, which because it was not important in the conversation. But the headline of the very first article that you wrote or we talked about, the headline is Working from Beach had its time in the sun and now it's back to the offices. Come on, people. Not that many people. That's the problem now with these work mandates. All of these leaders assumed that because they couldn't see their employees that they're working from the beach. That's the polar opposite of it. Like that's the extreme side of it. Not, hey, from your kitchen table, return the office. Cool.
Yeah.
That's probably the reality. Ironing board to offices. A lot of people using ironing boards as offices. Sweet. The beach. Come on.
Yeah,
That's a bit much in my opinion.
that's fair. That's fair. It's also impossible to sit at your laptop on the beach because of the sun and anyway, we could go back around that again. But that leads me just to say thank you for joining us this week. All of the articles that have inspired this conversation are going to go in the show notes. We'll also add some links to the books that we've referenced as well. And always, please don't forget to rate and review after you've listened as well. So please subscribe so that you don't miss another episode, and pass this along to someone that you think would enjoy listening or watching, because you can find us on YouTube as well. Thank you to Poet Ali for contributing the music to the show. And we will be back next week with more news, insights, and of course, opinions about everything comms and leadership in workplaces today. So keep tuning in and turning up.